Um, Thank you so much for coming here. I know the weather was crazy, and this is a special show for me because this work was about a decade in the making. Um, Not all my works are this time extensive, but this one was because it really and the way it's particularly special for me because of the way I grew with this work. Um, it started from a story that I read in a book called My Name is Red. It's by Orhan Pamuk, and a chapter of which is about a tree. And the story is basically about a drawing of a tree. Back in the day, miniature painting was, or what we call it, fane musavri, was part of a book. So there were drawings that went with the text, and it basically illustrated a narrative. And the drawings would travel from one city to another in order to be completed, because one drawing was not finished by one artist. It was one would draw, the other would draw foliage, the other would draw portrait, and finally the ustad, which is the top teacher, would draw the eye or the portrait of the central figure, because whenever you look at a painting, that's what your eye is drawn towards, and then you kind of move towards. So it was a very collaborative painting process, and they would all happen in something called kitab khana. Kitab means book, khana means home, and they were basically ateliers next to the libraries, basically. So this drawing of a tree was traveling from one city to another to be painted on, and then it fell from the horseback, and so it never basically got bound into a book. So this is basically, the text was about not knowing which story it belonged to, and it resonated with me because I was born in Iran and I grew up in Pakistan, and back and forth, it was always a struggle. I identified as Iranian till I went to university, National College of Arts, and I think art is something. Or especially miniature painting is something that kind of grounded me into accepting my Pakistani background as well, and I think as a child it was more like an idealistic, because I was away from my loved ones for most of the year, so it was almost like I identify as Iranian because I kind of yearned to be there. But then when I started studying art, and especially miniature painting, I saw historically the common grounds between how Persia and South Asia kind of merged through this art form. So I really now appreciative of both. But of course, there's always like, where do you belong? So I want to, I know the letterpress print that I did with Karen Florence. She teaches at ANU, Australian National University in Canberra, and that's where the book was letterpressed, and she helped me bind it the first time. Of course, it's been rebound multiple times. The paper art, it was also bound there the second time. And so I would want to read the text intaglio there, because I think it'll ground us to begin this conversation. Falling from a story like a leaf falls in fall. I'm a tree and I'm quite lonely. They allege that I've been hastily sketched onto a non-sized rough paper, so the picture of a tree might hang behind a master storyteller. True enough, at this moment, there's no slender trees beside me, no seven-leaf step plants, no dark billowing rock formations which resemble Satan or a man, no coiling Chinese clouds, just the ground, the sky, myself, and the horizon. But my story is much more complicated. The essential reason of my loneliness is that I don't even know where I belong. I was supposed to be part of the story, but I fell from there like a leaf in autumn. I know nothing about the page that I've fallen from. My request is that you look at me and ask, were you perhaps meant to provide shade to Majnu, disguised as a shepherd as he visited Layla in her tent? Or were you meant to fade into the night, representing the darkness of the soul of a wretched, a hopeless man? How I would have wanted to complement the happiness of two lovers who fled from the whole world, traversing oceans to find solace in the island rich with birds and fruits. I've wanted to shade Alexander during the final moments of his life on his campaign to conquer Hindustan, as he died from the persistent nosebleed brought by the sunstroke. Or was I meant to symbolize the strength and wisdom of a father, advise on love and life to his son? To which story was I meant to add meaning and grace? And then in the next page, it says, I don't want to be a tree, and I want to be its meaning. And that really resonated with me at that point. So I decided to, for the book, I decided to pick 9 trees from already existing miniature paintings and displace them from their paintings and put them back again in a book that is grounded by this story. And then add in drawings to them, which are on Mylar. So, you know, the one that is in front of me is my version of Starry Night, which is, you know, covering a broken tree, a broken and regrown tree. So, and this I made when I was pregnant, so I didn't know, you know, if I had a boy or a girl, but I knew that 9 months and trees, 9 trees, was something, and I think it was a very naive, I didn't think it's gonna turn into the body of work that it did now and educate me so much in my constant quest of, you know, colonialism and whitewashing and movement and displacement. So with this, I printed 9 extra papers, and every year I made 1 painting. And now my daughter is 10 years old. She turned 10 this January. And I have this work, which I made an exception for the last one. I made one this year. Starting from the bottle brush tree, which is basically when I would go on long walks with my dad. My dad used to wake us up at 4 in the morning, and used to, after Quran and Namaz, we used to go on walks in the morning, and that was a ritual since I remember, until the time I got into a university, and I was like, yes, I don't have to do it, but then I think anymore. But I think the seed was sown there. No matter how much you hate it then, I am a gardener now. You know, he used to say, what is the name of this plant? What is the name of that plant? And he used to ask us. And he wanted us, he was a surgeon, so he was very much into terminologies and with species, and of course, you know, never got to that level. But bottle brush was the easiest for me to remember because the flowers look like bottle brush and they're easy to remember. So starting from there to the pine trees, which reminded me of, you know, when we moved, I was 5 and we moved from Iran to Pakistan. In Pakistan, we were in a tribal area called Parachinar. That's where we lived for, I think, 3-4 years. And the place, Chinar basically is cypress. So it's the place was filled with these trees. And now, again, after I finished this work, I now see that a lot of Europeans, when they, you know, took over these countries, they kind of wanted to bring a piece of home into these countries. So they kind of had these mono trees that are basically they reminded them of home. So they planted a lot of cypress plants around the area. So it kind of erased the local flora and fauna for them to kind of bring back those memories or feel at home wherever. And no matter if they survived there or didn't, some of them actually burned because of the heat of the local area. But nevertheless, they did it. So that kind of that greenwashing, which we see even today, and this is again, this work kind of is it's a constant reminder. It educates me, and I think this is why I wanted my children to kind of know that every time they're lost, look at a tree, now I know that in Palestine, when they, you know, remove the olive gardens, they replace it with pine trees and with cypress trees, and they burn in the heat. They can't take it. They can't tolerate it. And of course, so, and then the orange, the Chinese orange, the Australian cherry blossom, you know, so, I mean, and then when it got to the point where I started working on the bergamot tree, which is a work that is kind of, it's over there, and this one and that one. And bergamot tree is a tree that bergamot is a tree and an essence and a smell that we associate to the British, because that was their favorite fragrance. We taste it in the English breakfast tea, but the origins of the tree is not there. You know, it's a Central East Asian tree that was moved, and now we have in Italy, we have farms and farms of them, and we know that the identity was erased and it became something else. So, and this work basically bounced off of the work that is in the other room, which is the Thorange. Thorange literally means bergamot, and that work was inspired by a 14th century poet. Their poem is called Thorange, and Thorange in that poem represents resilience and unconformity. So you know, and Thorange in Persian, you see that pattern in the center, it's the medallion that is represented in most of the Persian carpets, the books, and I repeated that, you know, many times for 2 years. It was a painting and a performance piece that happened, and it was very time-based work. So bounced off of that, then Thorange was done, and so this work is kind of an homage coming out of that work. So it always interests me how this work continued while I worked on site plan, on Thorange, on this bridge called My Back, on all the other works. This kind of work, this continued being, and I think every piece of those works kind of reflects in this work. And of course, finally, last year, I, you know, looked at olive trees, the Palestinian olive trees, which I found out, and you know, I'm ashamed that I found out about the trees now, after what happened, after what's happening, and of course, you know, this movement is teaching us so much, and I looked at the olive tree and how olive trees were being, the entire fields are flattened to kind of sever the economy and the relationship between people and their land. And this also happened in a lot of Native American tribes. And for the last one that I actually made an exception is because my family went through kind of a deconstruction in the past year, and it reminded me of the whole going through the entire process reminded me of the resilience of a tree. Because if I'm asking my kids to look at a tree when distressed, look at a tree when lost, look at a tree, then I looked at a tree, and then this image, the last tree, is actually a tree that that a Palestinian woman is hugging while the Israeli army had broken it, and I reimagined it kind of sprouting again and growing back again, and so resilience of the tree. And if you are around people and in a place that accepts you, that nurtures you, you know, hard times will pass and you'll regrow. I think my message to this is that, you know, if you're in a place that you're accepted, you put your roots in a place where you belong and you're nurtured by the people around you. Hard times will pass and then you will regrow again. You might not look pretty for a while, and that's okay. So I guess that was, I mean, from a very naive bottle brush, just because the name resonated something for me, to something that kind of deeply resonates with my practice of looking at colonial histories and whitewashing and taking away and renaming, rebranding, retitling, rehoming is something that resonates with me being a South Asian, having a history of being colonized, and looking at what's happening in the contemporary world. I guess these trees kind of help me understand that, and hopefully these stories will live on in a book or outside one. Yeah, so that was that. I think that was it. That was my little. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions if there is any. Yes. Yes, so this book is complete. And what I am doing is that I am going to have 9 editions of this book, but each book is going to be unique because the first drawing is going to be different in each book. So there are 9 limited edition artist books that I intend to create. With each of them will have one drawing that's the first drawing that'll be different, but then all the other drawings will be the same. Yes.
One comment and one question. My comment is, I also have become very interested in trees a long time ago, frankly. Mostly because America's a crazy place because we plant a lot of trees that aren't even native to the area.
Yes. Yeah.
What are these trees doing here, frankly, really? Is that they're not native to the soil.
Yes.
Disrupt the entire ecology all over the United States, frankly. They're invasive species. Some of them are invasive. In California, they have a bunch of. Anyway,
No, you're in the right track because this is just not just happens here. It happens everywhere.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, frankly. And that's part of the problem with humanity, actually. We are disrupting the natural balance of the ecological world. And trees are, frankly, they're witnesses to history.
Yes.
Because they outlive us, frankly.
Yes.
They can live from 100 to 500 to 1,000 years, frankly.
Yes.
So, we're going to be long gone by the time
Yes.
the trees will still be here, frankly.
Yes.
Especially if it's a native tree.
Absolutely.
A non-native tree, who knows what's going to happen to that tree. But I guess my question is, and I apologize for my ignorance in this question, but I assume, and this is very weak history of understanding what happened in Southeast Asia, so I'll take this the wrong way, but I assume Iran was colonized by the British, and Pakistan was also colonized by the British, or did I get that wrong?
Iran was never colonized.
Iran was never colonized?
No, Iran was never colonized. I mean, it had its ties during the Shah regime.
Yes.
It has the ties they were all economic, financial ties, in which you can almost say they were bought and sold under the table, but they was never physically colonized.
So they never planted a flag down there
No.
in Iran. It was just a lot of economic stuff going back and forth.
No.
The Britain.
Yes.
And what about Pakistan? Was Pakistan ever?
Yes. So Pakistan is part of India 78 years ago.
Okay.
And it was called Hindustan. And India was colonized for many, many years. Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Wasn't that fun?
Yeah. No, you were not. And when, of course, 75 years when they left, they divided Hindustan into 2 countries, Muslim majority Pakistan, Hindu majority India, which was, again, another disaster because India at the time had more Muslim population than Pakistan. So they were displaced people which were immediately became second-class citizens, and there was a lot of brutality that happened during that move. People had to leave their homes from Hindustan, people that lived there for centuries, because now they were Muslims and they didn't belong in Hindustan because they were Muslims. So, I mean, if you look up on the 1947 massacres, it's brutal.
And one more question. I assume Iran, they speak Farsi.
Yes.
Is it Arabic or Farsi spoken in Pakistan?
No, Pakistan has Urdu is their main language, national language, but then Pakistan has over 100 languages and dialects. I know 3 of them, but then, and these 3 are very different from each other. And
Farsi is not one of the 100, is that right?
No, but Urdu is a combination of Sanskrit and Farsi. Sanskrit is spoken in Hindustan, was spoken in Hindustan, and Farsi and Mughal are the people who kind of made that language, because Mughals were Turks who came to the subcontinent, Hindustan, and they conquered it for a long time, and they made those Persian relationships in terms of miniature paintings and architecture and literature, and Taj Mahal has a lot of Persian and South Asian influences. So Urdu is a very new language, whereas other native languages of Pakistan are some of the oldest languages that were ever spoken. For example, Brushiski is the language of the north, which is very close to China. So I can't even comprehend. It's almost like a dying language because it's concentrated in one area, and yeah, it's very complex over there.
And are those tribes? I apologize.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the whatever government exists? I apologize. They exist in are they oppressing all these tribal areas there, and they speak their own language? Is there oppression and suppression of those people?
Well,
or is there sort of sovereign respect for each of these disparate language/tribe situations going on?
okay, so if I say that there is a sovereignty in there, no, there isn't. But then if I say, oh, there's a dictatorship that's actually, stopping them, people from like speaking their language, I think that would be a false statement too. I mean, there are people in Quetta that are from the Hazara tribe. They're being, kind of wiped because of their being religious because them being religious minority. I think religion plays a more important role in those countries rather than culture or languages. My father was assassinated because he was a religious minority. He was Shia. He was a surgeon and he was shot by Taliban in his clinic. So that's how my relationship with the land that I actually first time saw a bottle brush, it was severed because of that. So we had to move then to Islamabad, and then my mom moved back to Islamabad, to Iran, and then we moved here. So it was, there are other ways. It's not like they're coming home and they're like, don't speak. And then also we have a lot of American schools there, which, a lot of people go to, and there's not much Urdu, which is the native language, because they're American schools. I know for a fact that there are people in Pakistan who don't speak in Urdu with their kids. They just speak English. I speak English with my kids because I'm here and I wanted them to, that's not a good thing, but I still want them to know Urdu and Farsi. But if you're living in Pakistan, there's no reason for your child to not know Urdu, right? But it's not, again, the subaltern is the body that kind of feels stronger if it's still speaking English, right? They want their children to speak English because they can get better jobs. They can be more accepted in the society. They can be, they're more educated. They're from another class. So it's still there. So it's not as overt as like going to my house and saying don't, but it's almost like if your kid is not in an American school, I don't even know if they're educated enough. You know what I mean? There's of course more opportunities.
It's very similar to what happened with the indigenous language in the United States.
Yes.
They've been erased, essentially.
Yes.
Because the families had to make a choice. Does the kid want to eat?
Yes.
Or does he not want to eat?
Yeah.
If he wants to eat, he's got to learn English.
Yes.
Forget the native language.
Yep.
Yeah. Very similar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you for your questions.
Yeah. Sorry for my bad.
No, you're good.
I'm pivoting a bit away.
Yeah.
Knowing your work as I do, I'm interested in hearing you talk a little bit about your relationship to metaphor, because you seem to have, even in the work that was a little bit more realistic in terms of the photography and all that, but still it was a very metaphorical conversation that was being had. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship to the use of metaphor in your work?
Thank you. That's a really deep question, and thank you for asking that. No. I expected nothing less from you, but again, in the works that are on paper, I think metaphor kind of changes its presence, or the way it's felt very strongly in my video works and in my performance works. And and they're kind of that metaphor becomes much more subtle, and it's almost like it's whispering in my paintings. The thorange, the prayer rugs, the trees, and of course it does play an important part, because I feel like when you use metaphor, it's not as straightforward. I love complexity. I've lived. I embody there's nothing called duality. There's no black and white. And I guess the best way one of the best ways to express it for me is the use of metaphor, because it's layered. And I guess that comes from my practice of miniature painting, because miniature painting is layered, both in terms of technique and in terms of just understanding of the visual vocabulary. And so both, the complexity, I mean, we were just talking about how complex it is just being in one country, when from one city to another, people are speaking different languages, they're wearing different clothes, they're eating different cuisines. So how do you express that as just one thing? So it's just so much up here, and you're like, okay, how do you simplify it without making it reductive? And I think metaphors, and then it's storytelling is a big part of my upbringing, of my culture, like oral storytelling or written ones. And, metaphors is a big part of those stories. And I mean, I by no means call myself a scholar in Quran, but then Quran is a book of metaphors. Nothing is just given to you, like, chewed and given to you. It's just, you have to figure it out. And I love that about art. I think when there's more than meets the eye, when I see that art, it excites me. And I think it's, the stories that I'm telling, they're more complex than just, lateral, straightforward. So I think, yeah, that's what I kind of hold on to. Thank you. That's going to go into my statement.
Did you record it?
Yes, yeah, the recording is happening. Yes.
Could you remind me of the name of the author of the text again? And then after that, let us know if English was the language of the book.
Yeah,
Okay.
Turkish. So Orhan Pamuk, My Name is Red. I'm going to buy you that book. So yes. So you're going to see it in the mail.
Well, considering that it was in Turkish initially, can you expound upon the reasons that it's in English?
Yep.
as
So
opposed to Turkish?
thank
Or
you.
that there's not a Turkish version also.
Thank you so much. Again, Turkish is not my language. I cannot read and understand Turkish. So the way I received this book and I read it was in English. So again, the reason why I used English and not maybe because the book is translated into like 60 plus languages. It's a award winner, and it's a very well read and well translated book. But this is me acknowledging my post-colonial background. It's part of me. You can't erase it. This is the language in which I speak and I understand the world. Farsi is the language that I think in, and then I translate it into, I speak in Farsi with my mother and my sisters, and I speak in English with my kids. So it's just like, it's a language that kind of brings together things. If I knew how to read Turkish, I would definitely attempt, but I don't, unfortunately.
Did you also consider Farsi or Urdu?
Yes, I can read Farsi really because my education system was in Pakistan. So I learned how to read and write Urdu. And of course, Urdu has the same alphabets as Farsi, but Farsi is an entirely different voice. So I can read it, and but I'm like super slow. It's like I can read the Quran, but I can't understand it because every Muslim child reads the Quran, but I don't know, I don't understand Arabic, but I can read it. Alphabets are the same, but the words are completely different. So I think it would be dishonest of me to try to tell a story in a language that it's hard for me to read it. Then I expect my audience to read it. You know what I mean? And it's the language that binds you and me. Culturally, we may be very million miles apart, but I think English is a language with all its limitations, which are many. It's a language that I can speak to my audience, and my audience can speak to me, and I can make sense of the world. And I understand its limitation, and I also understand how the histories that were written by the others are not the histories, but those are the histories I grew up with. Those are the histories that I read. Yes, and I'm now 40, and I'm kind of trying to be like, oh, that is problematic, that is problematic, that is problematic. It's kind of unlearning and relearning. So language is a really interesting part of my practice, and it's constantly, because it's so complex in my own life. That's why it's English. Thank you. That was a very good question. Yes. She wants to ask one last question. Just yes.
Like piggybacking on the language, I saw English as kind of your future. Is it kind of, I guess, is it a metaphor, the English for what is, I guess, your future interpretation of this past history? That's kind of how I understood it. Is that just in coming in and reading?
Yeah. I'm going to have to think about, I don't know, I'm going to have to think about it, because it's only like past 3 years that I've started translating my titles into Farsi or Urdu and then English. So I don't know if the future for me personally is English, because I'm still in the process of kind of like being very intentional and mindful about, what I'm using, what language. But the reality of the situation is that I'm now a citizen of the United States.
More as a language for your children.
Yes, which I'm hoping that they will at some point arrive to Urdu and English, but I know that that's their, my mother language was Farsi. I know their mother language is English, because that's what they heard me speak. For the first 2 years, I tried to speak in Farsi, but Dad would speak in Urdu, and so they would speak English with friends and TV, so it was a big hot mess. And then then she was speech delayed, and she was just stuck. Exactly. So for me, I learned Farsi. That was my first uninterrupted Farsi was my first language. When I came to Pakistan, Urdu and English and Pashto kind of all came together. And then, with me being in Lahore, Punjabi became part of my vocabulary. So it was almost like one established firmly, and then I built on it. But to my poor, first generation immigrant child married to, being in a house which has, Iranian, Pakistani, it was just a very, very complicated, very complicated. So, but I would want them to sort of, because there's so many books, there's so many things that I would want to read with them. So yeah, I don't want that literature to kind of die. And it's a sweet language. It's a very sweet language. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming here.